Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jonah Begay with the Telebehavioral Health Center of Excellence, and this is the Domestic Violence Prevention Program Series. Today's session is on White Buffalo Calf Women's Society, Inc., taking care of our relatives. We're joined today by Janet Routson, and also joining us is Selena Crady. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I'm going to go into a quick orientation to the layout that we have for this webinar. In the upper right-hand corner of the screen are questions and comments for our presenters. You are all on mute at this moment, and so if you have any questions or comments that come up during the presentation, feel free to type them in the upper left-hand corner. In the lower left-hand corner of the screen, we have the technical assistance. If you're having trouble seeing the slides, you're not hearing the audio very well, please let us know. That box is right there. Joining us in the background is Elena George and Mary Toledo. We'll try to help you out as best we can. In the very lower right-hand corner of the screen is the files for download. That's today's presentation in a PDF format, and you can download that at any time by clicking on the title itself. It'll highlight blue. From there, the Download Files button will become active. Click on that. It'll take you to a new window or a new tab, and then you can follow the prompts from there. Today's session is being recorded and will be
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Selena Crady, and I am the Domestic Violence Prevention National Coordinator for Division of Behavioral Health here at headquarters in Rockville, Maryland. So IHS Division of Behavioral Health hosts these monthly Domestic Violence Prevention Program series, and the purpose of these program series sessions are to showcase DVPI project activities, overview of their program, or develop a platform to exchange ideas on how to network and partner with other programs. Also, they talk about how to leverage resources or how to sustain a program, or either how to develop community-coordinated programs, as well as forensics healthcare services. So we have over 75 or 83 projects, DVPI projects throughout the country. 75 are Purpose Area 1, and 8 are for Purpose Area 2. So we have a total of 83 projects in the country. Today's webinar session will focus on the White Buffalo Calf Women's Society, Taking Care of Our Relatives by Janet. And I will say a little bit about Janet's bio and then give the presentation to Janet. Janet is a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, and she received her undergrad degree at Santee Gillespie University in secondary education, emphasis on Lakota studies. She taught high school for 8 years, then attended and received her Juris Doctorate from the University of South Dakota Law School. She is a licensed attorney in the state of South Dakota as well as the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. She has worked in both civil and criminal law arenas before becoming the executive director for White Buffalo Calf Society, a shelter and a community nonprofit working towards eradicating violence on her reservation. Janet was also employed with the Department of Interior, Office of the Special Trustees as the Fiduciary Trust Officer for Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Yankton Sioux Tribe, Santee Sioux Tribe, Pine Ridge Sioux Tribe. She is a dedicated mother, grandmother to her 7 grandchildren, and loves living on her homeland and making a difference for her people. That being said, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Janet.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be able to share some of the information on our work, and hopefully together as we work in our various parts of the country with our relatives, that some of the information and the work that we're doing can help others, but also we can learn from you. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. White Buffalo Calf Women's Society. We serve the Rosebud Reservation, the Sicangu Oyate. We have done so, it's our beautiful country. We're a very rural reservation. The nearest urban areas are between 178 miles to 220 miles, where we actually can see a mall. That's what we consider urban. So it takes us quite a ways to be able to sometimes even provide services. Our reservation is very large, and some of our communities can be, one of our communities is up to 150 miles away from the center of the reservation. So we have independent Indian communities outside of our reservation that our tribe still retains jurisdiction over, and we still provide services for in 5 different counties. So we are the oldest Native American shelter in the United States. We received our nonprofit status in 1978 under a wonderful group of women in our community who really wanted to make some changes. They got together and said, what can we do to help the women in our community that were being harmed by violence? They also had other agendas. They were very into environmental issues, water issues, and in the 1970s, it was also about empowering women both in and outside of the home. So it was our Sichango Oyate tribal members that got together and said, let's really make a difference. And we are so excited because this year we're actually celebrating our 40-year anniversary. I know that there's a few nonprofits, Native nonprofits across the country that claim more time than that, and we're honored to be amongst the very limited group of Native nonprofits that have been able to serve our communities for so long, and it has not been easy. White Buffalo Calf has had a lot of ups and downs. And as we started out as a community program, it was in the 1980s that we actually established our first shelter. White Buffalo Calf currently can provide shelter to 36 women and children. We do provide services to men also, just not in our shelter walls, but they receive the same services any women do. And we probably serve about 5 men a year. We certainly serve a lot more boys and young men. And they are allowed to be in our shelter up till, if they're children of an abused individual, they are allowed to be in our shelter up till 18. I know some shelters have caps on ages for men, but for young men, but we believe that anything that stands in the way from a woman leaving an abusive relationship that includes her older sons, that it's our responsibility and it is our duty to protect those children also. So that is one of our policies. I know not all shelters have those. I have 21. I have 20 full-time employees, 1 part-time employee. We have advocates on 24/7. I have dedicated sexual assault advocates, teen advocates. We're very excited because we were awarded some money through the Office of Victims of Crime to provide and develop a program for boys between the ages of 10 and 18 who are victims of violence. And we've been working on that for a couple of years, trying to establish policies, procedures, and educating our community about the victimization of young men. I'm excited about our DVPI funding because it allows us to continue to serve not only in the shelter, but also young people in our community, being able to go out to the schools and into the community and using evidence-based curriculum to work with our youth to not only respond to their violence, but also to deal with the complex trauma that they deal with day in and day out. We are named after the White Buffalo Calf woman, who's very sacred to the Lakota people, who brought us our values and brought us many of our traditions. And so we feel like we have a very special place in our community. People hold us to a higher standard. And we are a community institution. So we're very proud of that, but we're also very honored. And we understand the amount of responsibility that we have to our community to continue to serve them. So we have 24-hour crisis line, both for domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, meaning that if there's a call in the middle of the night, someone is always there to answer the phone and to respond, whether it's at the hospital or law enforcement is calling us to be on scene with them. we will respond to that. And before I get started, I really do have to give a shout out to my staff. They're a wonderful group of individuals who are all very dedicated to this work. As you all know, and I don't have to preach to the choir about this is not a job, this is a passion, and individuals don't last long doing this kind of work if we're just here for a paycheck. That my staff is very passionate about how we serve. And throughout this presentation, one of the things that you will see is that we do not call our clients victims, survivors. We call them our relatives. This is a teaching that we received, and it allows us to be able to serve very closely to our community members because we often are related to them, but it just reminds us too that we are not, we are hand in hand with them. There isn't somebody that is better than them, and we try to practice using our traditional language and calling in relative terms. An older lady for me, Toi, people often call me Unchi, a grandmother. So it's important that we practice that and remember that these are our relatives and that we do need to have compassion. So today I'm going to talk about how we employ our mental health response with our community partners. If we're stationed or we live in rural areas or even in an urban Indian health environment, we know that resources are very thin, and we're always scrambling on how to be able to use those resources to the benefit of everybody in our community. Living in a poverty-stricken community makes it difficult. We're often reliant on different types of grants and programs that may not be there tomorrow. So it's really important that we have partnerships and commitments from everybody that we work with, especially in the mental health response. What we see in our community, a lot of our the victimization and the issues surrounding our children do have to do with complex trauma, meaning that there has been more than one type of trauma that has impacted our children and our other relatives throughout their lifespan. And if there isn't some type of healing or interventions or recognition by service providers about how we service or provide services to individuals, then oftentimes they feel like they're alone because they don't feel like anybody is helping them at the level they need to. So I know that trauma-informed care has been a big buzzword, but it is really important that we respond to our relatives in a way that doesn't harm them any further. So as we're always changing and moving along, we really try to change our policies and look at what we're doing in order to be able to provide information that will, and services that will benefit them rather than harm them. It's also really important that we integrate our cultural teachings and services. Even though we live on a reservation, people aren't always aware of what types of healing can come from knowing our culture, but we also have to be sensitive to those in our communities that really aren't responsive to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also see a lot of re-victimization of individuals in our community due to mental health issues, due to drug and alcohol issues, or just due to a lifelong issues with victimization or with complex trauma. So we're going to talk about what we do to try to deal with or try to assist and service those who are and living in trauma. We have developed a mental health policy, and it's really surrounded around how we connect with our relatives, and it's really based off of our experiences. We are not therapists, although we do contract with therapists to provide therapy for our the relatives that we do serve, including our children. We're advocates, but throughout the years of advocacy and responding to violence against women, one of the most known things is that advocates are helpful to individuals who have experienced violence, and being able to connect with our relatives is so important. So having staff that are empathetic and have understanding and are survivors themselves, and being healthy is important in order to be able to assist our relatives as they move along through their lives. Mental health issues, we see them every day, and I think one of the best things we ever did was out through our DVPI grant, we actually wrote in an advocate, which we call a mental health liaison. Again, we're not therapists, but we did find that in assisting our relatives who have mental health issues, and assisting other staff, we often are running through the days, dealing with a lot of crises, and advocates not having enough time to sit down individually and help relatives who do have mental health issues. So our policies were really born out of our experience with individuals and our relatives that have mental health issues, but also drug and alcohol issues. And having a dedicated staff member that can spend time with these individuals for lengthy periods and being able to do the transports and set up appointments and walk our relatives through who suffer from these kinds of issues is really important for them to have someone that they can identify and connect with. So, it is our responsibility, and it's what we are passionate about, is to make sure that we enhance and help protect these individuals and their families. We also think it's really important that our staff understands and has core knowledge about mental health disorders, because it's often difficult with individuals who come into shelter or that we're serving in the community who are schizophrenic, who are bipolar, who are addicted to meth, who have years and years of alcohol addiction issues. So making sure that our staff has training is really important, because we want to make sure that we are able to have that core knowledge in order to help them. We also want to make sure that we are always acknowledging the rights and interests of people, of the relatives that we work with who have mental health disorders, to make sure that we are providing benefits rather than trying to, a lot of times people operate under older notions. Things are always changing. There's always changing types of treatments for individuals with mental health issues. But then again, they are the most vulnerable, and so our practices and policies at our level, we need to make sure that we're always reviewing them, that we're always being able to change them if we need to, because we only want to be a benefit and not further harm. So we do a consistent evaluation. That means every 6 months we sit down and take a look at our policies and practices to make sure that we are benefiting our relatives. And that's not always easy to do when we get busy, but we need to make sure that someone in the organization is always saying, hey, it's that time. We need to sit down and take a review and have the staff get together and what are we doing? Is this working? Is it causing more harm? Again, making sure that we have training. Now, training can be costly, but I think a lot of people don't understand that there are a lot of different trainings that are local. You don't have to go to, San Diego or Arizona to get some. In South Dakota, we have different coalitions, Native Women's Society, the South Dakota Network, and the South Dakota Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Rape that often put on free trainings that can help our advocates, or if we need one, we can request one. I think coalitions are underutilized. And so even though if you can't become a full member, you certainly should reach out and see what type of membership you're eligible for, so that you can also receive the benefits of training. And we often partner with our community partners, such as Sintha Glushka University. We often partner with them, and they bring in trainers, and we don't have to pay a dime for it, but our staff can attend. So I think sometimes we have to think out of the box on when it comes to training. And it's even though this grant does provide money for that, we often see that, you know, we have a need for continual training of all of our staff members, and, you know, reaching out to those in the community that can, you know, come in partnership with you to be able to provide those are really important, but also, you know, coming together and just learning from one another is really important. Having the understanding of trauma-informed care and what historical trauma looks like in Native communities should always be at the core of our practices. If you don't have a basic understanding of what that looks like or what it's done to us as a people, it really makes it even more difficult, and you are certainly disconnected from the community if you're not providing training or people don't really understand how important it is to look at that when you are developing policies and procedures, but also while you're practicing, while advocates are working with individuals, and what role has historical trauma played in the life of the relatives that we're currently serving to help increase their life skills and participation in a positive manner. You know, often we see individuals or our relatives that have mental health issues and disorders. For us, you know, it's easy for us to say as advocates in a shelter setting, well, you need a doctor's appointment because you need your meds, are you diabetic? You know, taking care of our relatives in a physical, making sure they're, you know, not sick and having their meds, but we don't put the same importance on their mental health. And we should, because they often come to us in, you know, some really terrifying circumstances. And it's not just PTSD, but, you know, a report I recently read about mental disorders among domestic violence survivors was that they often are not really diagnosed with PTSD, and that a lot of their mental disabilities and handicaps often come from not the physical abuse, but the years of psychological abuse. And so when we're serving individuals that have been traumatized for, you know, sometimes most of their lives, their mental health needs to be put at the top of the list. Who's doing the evaluating? What are your local resources in your community? How are women able to pay for that? Often, like with the state of South Dakota, even though we're on a reservation, the state of South Dakota has a Victims Compensation Fund, which is a federal program, and they will pay for short-term counseling. And so I don't think we often, you know, ask women when they're coming into shelter, hey, or the women that, other relatives that we're serving in the community, do you need someone to talk to? You know, we have, these are the different programs, and we think it's a good idea that not only do you take care of that broken arm, but that we can try to talk about some healing and talking to somebody about everything you just went through. A lot of times, you know, we ignore these things because we don't have an understanding of what mental illness is about or what it looks like, or, you know, what damage has been done. But I think it's real important for programs, tribal programs, Indian Health Service programs, that we all really make that a priority amongst our programs to really take a look at that and how do we serve our relatives, and how are we doing a disservice because we are not paying attention to those mental health issues. And it's just not something we think of, especially if they're coming into shelter and they're bruised up, and you want to make sure that they're okay physically, but we rarely ask those questions about a mental health, how they are doing there, and what resources we have in our community to be able to help them, assist them through their healing. So it's really important for us, and I'll talk a little bit about our collaboration that we have. So every month for children in our community, White Buffalo Calf partners with all of our various programs, whether they're tribal, non-tribal, nonprofit, that deal with youth. We call it the Collaborative Body or the Society of Care. And we meet once a month and provide each other information and education about what we all do, what are our services. We come together and we plan different events to help advertise, what we do, what they do, so that the community can access the wonderful people that work in our community. We also participate as victim services in our local MDT, which is a multidisciplinary team. Some communities have community response teams or CCRs, and we just think it's so important that we participate with our community and trying to be part of the solution, because if we're not at the table, then we don't know what's going on, and we are doing a disservice to our relatives. So the same thing happens with our mental health. We provide education to people in our community about mental health issues and how that intersects with violence against our relatives. We also try to partner with our policymakers, that's our councils, that's people that are on our health boards, and really trying to fight for improved services for individuals in our community with mental health issues. They're often shunned. People don't know how to deal with them, so they just would rather say, well, our services really aren't meant for you, and, we can't serve you. And they may not be as blatant as that, but certainly their policies and procedures often keep people with mental health issues outside of that. And so really exploring that as a service provider with our community partners and other people we collaborate is, what services will they provide, and how can we access for the relatives that we are working with. So having that regular flow of information going back and forth, and that means taking time outside of the response that we're doing and sitting down at the table. Our philosophy at White Buffalo Calf is, look, we're not waiting for anybody to come to us. We go out in the community and we're there to provide and to connect and to collaborate with our other program partners. Having roles, since the 1980s, when a lot of psychiatric hospitals were closed to individuals, and we've seen the rise in years and even in Native communities of the homelessness of individuals who have mental health issues, and a lot of times those community services are more important than anything. But we have to make sure in our roles as advocates to make sure that our relatives who have mental health issues are not only able to access that, but that they're also treated in a manner that they should be respected. Of course, we do awareness when we talk about mental health in our community. A lot of people and families, including and especially for those who do have mental illnesses, there's a lot of denial in our community about that. People don't recognize the ups and downs of someone who's bipolar, or, how do you handle someone who has schizophrenia, and how do we handle them in shelter, when we have closed doors and individuals are often stuck inside because of fear and harm, and how do we deal with that internally to make sure that everybody's protected. But it also helps to support and empower our relatives so that they can gain more freedom from the fear and the harm that they live in day to day from being victimized. We also want to make sure that we are always, again, providing for training for our staff, but also that our staff is an integral part in how we develop, how we plan, how we manage, how we monitor, and how we evaluate our services, because we do not know if we are doing a good job unless we're asking our relatives. And unfortunately for us, in a shelter environment, the individuals that we serve, our relatives often are, beat for criticizing. And so, but we need that criticism. So I always tell my staff, you want to make sure that, when someone complains, that we use that as a tool to be able to evaluate, what are we doing or not doing correctly, because we want to make sure that we're always being empowering to the relatives that we serve. So some of the things that we have been working through the years to really improve how we provide services, and one of them is to, develop a directory. And again, we're all short on time. We don't always have the ability to be able to stop and say, oh yeah, let's just write this directory. But if you are able to break that down into more manageable tasks for staff, oftentimes you can see that really is going to come together, and it really makes a difference. An advocate who is on call, picks up the phone, it's a distraught family member. They're saying, oh, our granddaughter's being abused, but, she's schizophrenic, and, she's with this guy, and he's beating her every day, and we don't know what to do. And in order to empower your advocacy and empower your programs, having a directory sitting there that they'll be able to, know and understand and know how to use it, and that it's right there at their fingertips, are able to give that information as soon as possible to these families, therefore empowering the family, but also empowering the advocate to be able to provide the kind of information that they need to. Again, about the dedicated advocate, just for someone who can spend a big bulk of their time just working with the individuals, the relatives that we serve both in and out of shelter, is so important. I mean, it helps support the other advocates, but again, it supports the individuals who have these issues because they have a face that they could trust. So even if they're not in shelter anymore, they still know that that advocate's there for them and be able to make connections and help them find the resources that they need. So it's so important to have that known face and someone that could spend their time on it. It was one of the best things we ever did, was to have that dedicated advocate position for those who have mental health issues. We also do regular trainings for our mental health providers. So what that means is we've been really lucky, and we are now part of the training cycle for our local Indian Health Hospital, so that any new staff that comes in, they have to attend orientation, and we've been given a spot. And we've been given a spot because we asked for it. We said our Indian Health Service providers need to know what the resources are in our community. And because a lot of what they'll see when they're servicing individuals within our IHS hospital is people that have been victims of domestic violence or sexual assault or stalking or, child abuse, and that they should be able to have the knowledge. They should be able to walk away from that knowing exactly what White Buffalo CAF does in our community, so that they'll be able to access us, so we'll be able to support them. It also has increased our, or solidified our relationship with Indian Health Services. A couple of years ago, our emergency room was shut down, and when responding to violence, women, whether it was sexual violence or domestic violence, were often brought in by ambulance. And if you were to be brought in by ambulance, there was no emergency room, so they were taken to other areas. And unfortunately, living on a reservation, we have border towns that often aren't friendly to natives, and we actually had local hospitals that refused to take sexual assault victims. So our advocates, even that, the distance, 45, 50 miles, 100 miles, we were driving 200-mile round trips. We had like a sexual assault emergency vehicle where we had rape kits and clothing, and because our women and children were just being taken way out of our area in order to be provided these services. And we felt like our relationship with our local hospital, really fell apart at that point. And of course, we felt disjointed because we didn't have any say-so in what was going on with our health care either. It was scary. But I think one of the things that we did that was really important was that, we worked with IHS and and our local health boards to try to deal with the issue and try to lessen the impact it had on our relatives. So it's really important that you have those regular meetings. We have our START meetings at the Sexual Assault Response Team meetings every month at IHS, so that our sexual assault, our SANEs, nurse examiners are able to attend. They don't have to leave the hospital. Both law enforcement and White Buffalo CAFs, sexual assault advocates all participate in those meetings so that we can deal with any of the issues such as what came up with the ERs. Having problems not having clothes, so we, had to do the vehicle sexual assault response. Of course, like I said before, working with our state Native coalitions to make sure that we're coordinating services and getting trainings, not just to us, but also to healthcare providers and other responders. I mean, it's important to include ambulance drivers, 911, working with our local dispatch and the police department, so that first responders, that we're all on the same page and that we're able to really provide the services that are needed. Making sure for us, our basic core advocacies are providing transportation to make sure that we have counselors that we can call 24/7 for individuals, especially for those who have mental health issues, because they often come into shelter and they haven't been on their prescribed medications, and they often, and sometimes we do have to make tough choices. If you have an individual who is violent because they haven't had their medication and they have been victimized and they come into shelter often very angry and explosive, we sometimes have to make that decision about, what are we going to help this individual who may be more harm to everybody else in shelter, and so where do we find those resources to make sure that she's safe, but also that everybody else in the shelter is safe. And so we have had issues like that that we have had to deal with. We have had women that came in and that were, who you thought maybe after intake, you don't exactly know, if they're denying their mental health issues and then become explosive or abusive to their children, having to call the police or child protective services in order to protect themselves and to protect their children too. So we've had to make those kinds of decisions, but your staff should be able to respond to that, and that means providing really good training for them. How do they spot the symptoms? I mean, what do they do in that kind of situation if you do have someone that is so explosive and that they might harm you or somebody else that's within the shelter? Accessing housing is really difficult, but it is a little bit better if you are able to help out an individual who does have a mental health issue that has been recognized for what it is. They aren't able to work, and maybe they can apply for SSI. We often work with our relatives. Maybe they don't have a lot of resources, but because they are diagnosed as schizophrenic and are not able to work, then we can help them access those kinds of resources. And then once you do that, it's a little bit easier to be able to try to find specialized housing for them. On our reservation is absolutely nothing. I mean, our housing situation is really bad, and so we often have to help women outside of our area and outside the reservation just because we don't have those resources here. We do have a really good, we have good vocational programs for job assistance and training, both with the state of South Dakota and St. Glesch University, along with the tribe, have a local vocational jobs program so that you can help we can help our relatives to be able to access those kinds of resources so that they don't get caught up in being abused financially or feeling like they have to go back to their abuser because they really don't have any resources. So it's really important for us to not only create those partnerships, but to keep them up. You know, like any relationship, you have to have pretty regular conversations, and so making sure that we are meeting on a regular basis, and if there's changes that need to be made or whatever we need to do what's best for the relatives that we're serving. One of the other things for our relatives who have mental health issues, often they're are abused financially, meaning if they do have some kind of monetary resource that they're often being taken advantage of, whether they're elder or whether they have mental health issues or they have addiction issues, and they have qualified for some kind of services, monetary services. What we see is family members and abusers often taking advantage of them. And so really working with third-party payee programs. Our tribe has one. BIA Social Services usually have some for Native individuals who have like individual Indian money accounts, and working with them to help protect their assets. The other thing is we also want to remember that there are other types of, wherever you're living, there are other types of third-party payee programs. So we often try to get women into those so that they're not, you know, they will write the checks for them, help them pay their rent, but also help them keep an eye on their money so that people aren't taking advantage of them. So we develop trainings in our community, and we develop those trainings along, and that's expected out of my staff, that they all be able, and, you know, people are shy. It's not easy. Even today, I can't see one of you, but I was nervous. So, you know, even if you, I'm not standing in a whole crowd of people, it could be nerve-wracking, but providing training for your advocates and people on your staff to be able to go out and do trainings in your communities so that we can assist those and identify those individuals in our communities who do have mental health issues. You know, that creates an environment where there is more acceptance, and there's also more help because people know where to go. They'll say, oh, you know, I have a relative and she's being abused, and, you know, they said she has mental health issues, but I sat in on a presentation, and this is what White Buffalo CAF can do for them. And if we can't do anything for them, we can sure find someone in our community or outside of our community to help. So an important part of our work that we do is integrating our cultural teachings and services for our community members who are in danger from abuse and sexual assault. Not everybody is comfortable with it, but what has made a difference what type of has really made a difference in our work that we do is to have the intention, because if you don't start with the intention, then it never will happen. I myself did not grow up in a traditional home, although I do understand and I do practice some of our traditions, and I certainly do understand our history and our culture, but I am not the local expert. And so, and us not being afraid of that and not being ashamed that we have been acculturated, we have been assimilated, but that we don't let that stop us from providing and developing programs that will benefit our people. We know that when someone is harmed, or is seeking a healthier way of life, that knowing who they are and being proud of who they are really goes a long way in their recovery and healing. So it is our intention to integrate our culture and our cultural practices in all of our work. And so we're not afraid to go out into our community and ask people, our elders, people at the college, people in our schools, elders in our community to help us provide cultural services to our relatives. And we have to make those connections. We can't sit here and say, oh, well, just everybody's going to come to us and, we're just this great program and we can all do, yeah, no, that's not how we do our work. We're like, let's go out there and let's continually connect with individuals. What can they teach us? What can they teach our staff? So we have continual training every quarter just on what type of cultural services that we have. Do we have any weak areas that we need to be able to teach our staff members? If we have staff turnover, we have to be able to address that. We also, are there people that we are working with out in our community? So most of the grants that we have, White Buffalo Calf has, we write into all of them about our cultural services, and we're able to utilize our funds to be able to assist people. So maybe, we don't pay a medicine man to come and do a ceremony for us, but we certainly help them out with gas. We don't pay someone to come, and we do a sweat twice a month, and we don't pay that individual to do the actual ceremony, but we do, these are community members and some that, may not even be employed, so how are they going to have the gas money to, drive 50 miles one way to come and provide services? So we make sure that we write it, and we do have cultural consultants, people that come in and not only train our staff, but also work with our youth and work with the women in shelter, so we can pay them for providing the knowledge that they have, and to be able to come and train us and our staff about what are the different things that we can do to help healing and to help. So one of the best things I think we do that really has a big impact, that we smudge every day. So someone from my staff, and nobody, we do have some more traditional people in our staff, but, it's about getting that sage and taking it around and making sure that every morning that's how we start off our day amongst our staff, that we are using the sage to be able to get rid of the negativity, which always comes in the door every single day, because we are providing services to people that are victims of violence. And so addressing that with the daily smudging, and it's so beautiful when we watch our small children that have been here for a while. At first maybe they're a little shy about it, but every day then they know, this is how we smudge, and being able to pass a way of healing onto them that is something that is just as simple as having some sage in a shell and lighting it, and, for some of our advocates saying a prayer, but, taking it around and, having that tool available to everybody. And so that is really important, especially for those that really have not had any participation in cultural healing. Not everybody knows what smudging is. Not everybody knows what an inipi is, and really trying to get them to, if they want to be a little bit more comfortable with it, and even staff. So if we have staff, that's one of the trainings we provide. So if we have staff that have never been into an inipi, and maybe they never will want to go into one, but they still need to understand the basics of it, because if we have any of our relatives that are interested and have never done that, then they at least need to be able to impart that. So we hire individuals to come in and talk about what that is. What does that mean? What's the practice about? How are we supposed to do it? What's the respectful way? And what does it do? How are they going to be able to give information to our relatives about that particular practice? So that's important too, is providing training to advocates, specific training on, cultural service. What does sage do? What does sweetgrass do for us? The use of cedar, the use of the inipi in different ceremonies and practices. What we have to really be careful about is cultural shaming. I have seen it over and over again, and we often don't recognize that's what we're doing, but people do it by saying things like, well, that's not the way we do it, or you shouldn't be doing it that way. We all need to recognize that everybody follows different types of religions or spirituality, or different type of medicine man, and their practices may be different. And so it's okay amongst my staff if you don't want to practice that way, but it's not okay to say, oh, you should know that, or, you shouldn't be doing it that way, because that is part of that cultural shaming. So not to participate in that. We also give our relatives a bundle. We call it, for our sexual assaults, we call it an aftercare kit. And we provide these little cards in with it that kind of explain what everything's about. But one of the cards that we have is about, how to use sage and sweetgrass, and we give them a shell and lavender and cedar, and we instruct them on using them. So not really for a spirituality type of situation, but it's all about healing. Knowing like lavender is really an anti-anxiety, and so is sweetgrass and sage, so that how do they use that in a manner that's going to help them be able to get through today. Often we see our relatives coming in and they, are depressed and they can't get out of bed. And so for us, it's a good opportunity to go in and have a conversation with them and saying, we know you would rather sleep all day, but, we'd like to introduce you to this practice of getting up every morning and smudging and then planning what you're going to do for the rest of the day. It's often so hard when you are in those kinds of situations to try to think beyond sometimes even what you're going to do every 5 minutes. So what I included in this was really about what we use sage for, what we've been taught to use it for. And so we give this information out to our relatives. That also includes the use of sweetgrass, the use of cedar, and then use of lavender. Now, I know some individuals that run other programs, and they often use, another thing to use is the aromatherapy, or the use of the oils for healing. They use them in hospitals also, and you could get training for your staff to be able to use them. I know several people that practice with them, and we used to have the dispensers, the steam dispensers, but they're kind of, you give them away. You're like, you need this more than we do. We use medicine men and women in our community to help provide healing opportunities. We take our women and children out to our local sun dances and ceremonies if they need it. We have sweats twice a month. And then we also have, there are certain ceremonies that you can do just for healing. And so we have people in the community that we have been able to convince to assist us, and they're so willing to help people heal. So often what stops us from doing that again is people get stuck in cultural shaming, or, we're going to use this one and not that one. But really it's about asking questions, requesting permission, finding out what the best practices are in your community. And it's always growing and changing, and we all have to be okay with that. So that's important too. We don't have a lot of time left. One of the things that we try to do is help plan for a decrease in the re-victimization. And one of the ways that we do this is really look at, when we have relatives that we're serving, let's take a look at what are their core issues. Are they mental health? Are they addiction? Really understanding those dynamics of multiple trauma situation, PTSD, traumatic brain injury. We service so many women that have been re-victimized who have traumatic brain injury and received that brain injury during a prior assault. The psychological maltreatment, the depression, the addiction, we need to be able to identify it from the get-go when you're dealing with our relatives, because that's really what pinpoints individuals for possible re-victimization. And so taking all those into consideration, how do we do safety planning, and how do we do these short and long-term goal setting? It's real important. That's what we do with everybody that we provide services for, but with also training our advocates. So bringing a therapist in or bringing a local individual in and having them train the advocates about how to do realistic goal setting. Some of the individuals are so traumatized or so sick from their illnesses, their lack of medication, that they're not able to do long-term goal setting right now. So how do we do the short-term goal setting? Also, it's really important for us to do safety planning and really looking at what you're doing in your programs now. Is it working for you? And the way you know is ask your relatives that you're serving. Does this work for you? Support groups are good for us, looking at our own policies, making sure that we're connecting with all the different programs and facility to make sure that we're providing what we can. We love doing the AANA meeting transports. Often they don't have that outside of our services, so really trying to support them in sobriety is important. And of course, working collectively with other programs to why are our relatives being re-victimized on a consistent basis. So I'm sorry I kind of overran it here. Just got a couple of minutes for questions, and I see I have a couple of questions. Selena, should I just go ahead and answer one of them?
Actually, you know what? I think there is one question. That was my question. I was going to ask you if you could tell the audience a little bit about the trainings, the type of trainings that were provided for the advocates. And you've touched on a few of those, but maybe if you could just expand on that.
So we do one specifically for facilitating of different types of groups. We bring in a therapist or someone from our college to talk about how you do facilitate in a group, because we often have to do that, especially with women in shelter that often are in crisis and create drama situations. So our advocates really need to be trained on that. We do for mental health training. We also work with our therapists to provide training for our advocates on, what to look for. How do you help women, like how do you do relaxation? So training our advocates about teaching women to use those kinds of techniques, like the stress balls, the aromatherapy, the relaxation techniques. And then, of course, our cultural trainings about, what goes on if, when someone does want to go to sweat. What does that look like? How does that feel? How do you use the little medicine bundles? Making sure everybody has training on those too. And I'm sorry I cut you off.
That's fine. Okay, we'll go ahead and open up to anybody that has any question. This is the time to ask. I know it's 3 o'clock. I don't know, Jonah, if there's another webinar session. If you need to cut us off, that's okay. But if we could just spend at least another 5 minutes just for others to see if they have any questions.
And Selena, in Indian country and across the country, a big safety issue for us is the use of meth. What we've seen, what it does to individuals or relatives that we're trying to provide services for is that, advocate safety. That's the other thing. In every staff meeting we have every month, we talk about safety issues, whether that's safety for advocates, safety for, women in shelter. I mean, we've had several incidents, and so has others, individuals I know in other programs, where, we really need to be careful because meth and other types of drugs, especially the way they're mixing them, cocktailing them, is what they call, often makes people erratic. And so how do we plan for those? How are advocates supposed to respond to those? And what kind of policies and what kind of conversations are staff members having to make sure that our advocates and staff are also safe, but other people that we serve too? That's really important.
Okay, thank you. There is a question. It says, it's from Mitzi Pope. Are advocates trained on suicide risk? Can you talk a little bit about that?
And we're really lucky because if you reach out to your local suicide programs, a lot of tribes have them. They provide training, and yes, we try to do quarterly training on the suicide risk. That's really important also.
Anybody have any more questions for Janet? I see a few people are typing.
Well, they also can have my email address, and I'd be glad to answer any questions. But again, I'm just so honored that you all asked for us to be able to present today, and I just am so thankful for all the wonderful advocates out there, and I think too often people that serve in our community aren't recognized for the great jobs that they do, so I really want to thank all of you for doing and being dedicated to what you do in your community, even though we do some of the toughest jobs, but thank you so much for all the work that you do. I know how awesome everybody in our res is that works real hard, and so please know that you are, that I'm thankful for what you guys do.
Janet, we have a couple more questions. There's one by Helen Jonathan.
Yeah, I see that.
What would be the best way to implement cultural education for new IHS employees?
I think that, that needs to be a priority in your area. But if you have programs, that work in your community, they'd probably be more than willing to do that. We work really good with, I can't remember what her position at IHS is, but, doing those, having them doing it at new employee orientation doesn't take a lot of time for them to be a little bit more aware of what goes on. And even though we're doing an orientation about our services, of course, culture comes into play too about what we do. So even having your local programs come in and present is important.
I think let's do one more question. There's one, Joy Friedman. Do you have or do trainings or support groups on or for sexual exploited persons in Indian country?
Yes, we do have, we do support groups, and we have done some trainings. White Buffalo CAP actually was one of the first programs in the country to receive funding for sexual assault response, and I think we do a really good job on that. And so there's actually, and if Joy wants to email too, I could put her in touch with individuals who could do some training for them too. But
Okay.
we also collaborate with our local coalitions. They are providing like sexual assault response training for free for us. So that's important to reach out to them.
Okay. So it's already 3:05. We
Thank
were
you.
allotted 1 hour. What we're going to do is we're going to conclude here. Just so everybody knows, this webinar session is actually going to be posted on the IHS DVPI website, and that website is going to go live early next week. What I'm going to also do is I'm going to send out a link of that website when it goes live on the listserv. So if you're not on the DVPI listserv, you can just go to ihs.gov and put DVPI listserv in the search engine, and you can get on there if you're not on the listserv. And I'm also going to share that webinar series with the rest of the area project officers so they could disseminate that to the rest of the DVPI projects in Indian country. And I just want to say, Janet, thank you. This was a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for being on our webinar. And that's going to conclude our call. Thank you.
Thank you.